Welcome to another insightful session of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series. I'm Brian Gilbert, your host for today's exclusive exploration into a captivating realm of the cannabis industry in Puff, Pass, Prosper, the insider's guide to operating a consumption lounge. Today, we're not just scratching the surface, we're diving deep into the complexities, potentials, and future trends of consumption lounges, or as I was schooled right before diving onto this broadcast, better yet, designated consumption establishments. Our NCIA retail committee members are here to unravel the mysteries and offer you a comprehensive understanding of how these establishments operate and their impact on the broader cannabis landscape. If this is your first time joining us, just a quick reminder, this webinar is part of our premier digital educational platform, the Industry Essentials series, and our commitment to you is to bring you timely, engaging, and essential education directly to your screen, ensuring that you stay informed in this ever-evolving industry. So let's get this show on the road. Get ready to puff, pass, prosper as we unlock the insider's guide to operating consumption establishment. Without further ado, let's welcome our distinguished panel and kick off this exploration together. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian Hart, founder of Vitan Group and distinguished member of NCIA's retail committee for this past year. Welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar. Brian, great to have you here today. I think before we get started, you're going to lead the panel through some personal introductions and then dive right into the program from there.
Mr. Gilbert, that sounds great. Thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. Well, let's go ahead and get started with some of our panelist introductions. I'll introduce myself. Again, my name is Brian Hart. I've been in the cannabis industry, in the professional industry for 5 years. Before that, I was traveling the world, consuming cannabis and sharing it with people. I've grown it, I've sold it, I've consulted on it in many different states, and currently I am an entrepreneur starting my own hemp beverage called Vitam. So it's a pleasure. And I'd be more than happy to introduce our next panelist, Brian Anderson.
Hey, thanks, Brian. So I'm an architect located in Cambridge, Mass. Been in business about 29 years, 9 of those now in the cannabis space, serving cultivation clients, manufacturing facilities, as well as retail. We do a lot of retail across the US. New York is a huge market right now. As architects, we are exploring the world of consumption lounge, anticipating it greatly, and beginning to think through some of those aspects that might have physical or air exchange or space relationships. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brian Anderson. All right, we'll move on to our next panelist, Richard Fleming.
How you doing? I'm Richard Fleming. I am the founder and CEO of Ultra State Cannabis Company. We are provisionally equity licensed Class A microbusiness and designated consumption establishment. My background has been in the legacy caregiver market, and now we're finally moving to the regulated industry with the Detroit Cannabis Project and the program that they created to even give us a provisional license, which means that we haven't secured our location, but they believe in myself and my team and our plan enough to let us attempt to secure our property and take them into traditional licenses. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Wonderful. And Richard, fully confident you're going to have a wonderful establishment. Our next panelist is going to be Ace Castillo.
Hi, everyone. I am Ace Castillo. I am the founder and CEO of Banyan Dispensary out of Fresno, California. I got my license approved in 2018. So it has been a few years, long journey, but we are scheduled to open May of 2024. Prior to that, my background in cannabis began under, I operated a dispensary in 2008 under Prop 215. So I have been advocating for this legalization the whole time. So I'm so glad that we're here. And I'm very interested in cannabis consumption lounges or establishments. I need to change my verbiage there. Because, I'm always looking for ways to enhance my customers' experience when they come to Banyan Tree. And so, I'm so interested in just I'd love to hear from all you guys. And so thanks for letting me be here.
Hey, thank you so much, Ace. We really appreciate that. Well, all right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and dive into our session. So we're going to cover 3 general topics. And those 3 topics are going to be what is a consumption lounge, and how does a business make customers happy and, of course, make money? We'll transition then into discussing how a business can operate through the legal and insurance requirements. And then our third topic will be discussing how a consumption lounge could change or affect cultural and normative shifts. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump into it. And we're going to start off with a definition of what a consumption lounge is. As always, we have a panelist that's eager to jump into it. So one of the guys, y'all want to go ahead and give a traditional definition? I know I have one.
I think Rich probably has a best beat on it out of Michigan, out of Detroit. Rich, why don't you give us what Detroiters have, what this great state of Detroit has defined it?
So it would be a commercial facility that allows adults a place to legally consume cannabis in all forms. Due to our state's clean air legislation and cannabis regulations on combustion and even ingestion, makes designated consumption establishments necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think, that touches on already the point that with consumption lounges or, for example, a designated consumption establishment, depending on the verbiage you want to go with, but I think, Rich, you provide a great example of why we need that. It's important to look at the legal aspects. Every state needs to have a license and a law in order to have a consumption lounge. But, I think if we take it back to what the history of, we could say cannabis consumption is, cannabis consumption, it's people getting together. It's socializing with one another. It's especially when, already many places where it's still illegal, but even in the past when it was generally illegal, you had a group of people that were willing to, break the law together, and share that experience and look out for one another. So yeah, I think a consumption lounge or a designated consumption establishment, looking back at the history, these are people getting together and they're sharing and enjoying cannabis with one another.
I'll add sort of, from where I am on the East Coast, a couple of examples here in Massachusetts and as well New York State. Massachusetts, we have a license type, which is great, but we don't have any legislation yet around that license type. And so our Cannabis Control Commission, the CCC, has started a campaign or started a gathering information. And so we've participated in some of those information gathering pieces so far. And I was a bit discouraged. I am encouraged by the fact that they're doing that, but that they're gathering the information, but discouraged with them leading with, okay, what's the HVAC requirements for a consumption lounge, right? Zeroing right in on this idea that maybe it's a cigar lounge, right? It's a dark space. It's in the basement. It's a lot of smoke. We got to worry about the health of both our staff and, right, we all have been through cigarette smoke. We know what that's all about. And I think it's putting it in a box that it should not be in. So I'm here to say that I'm encouraged by different states taking different actions on this, right? The way Ace is describing it, the way Michigan is defining it as a designated consumption establishment, it starts to open up with different language what an establishment might be. The entrepreneur should define that. Is it a spa, right? Is it a wellness spa where you can go and do Reiki and yoga and massage and have an interaction that way? There's many different, I think what I'm seeing encouragement for is many different definitions of what the underlying business can be.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good point to make. A consumption lounge for consuming cannabis, and it's not what the traditional idea being is there's smoke everywhere. There can be different methods of consuming cannabis.
Right. So
with that said, I think it would be good if we actually dive into a little bit more about some general ideas about what a consumption lounge is and how people would operate a consumption lounge. One of the topics we have to discuss is, it's still a business that needs to operate and generate revenue. It's a business that needs to make its customers happy as well. So I thought it'd be great if we go ahead and dive into that section as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So our model uses cannabis as a catalyst with a focus on health, wellness, and a working space by day. We will host yoga, meditation, informative classes. So those classes are like intro through advanced cannabis, growing, cooking, and even bud tender training. At night, we become a center for music, arts, culture, game, movie nights, events such as wedding receptions. And that really just scratches the surface of the options that we have available with this license type.
Yeah. That's a great point. Very good, very good point. One thing I've noticed as well of what a consumption lounge can be is, and again, you mentioned it's people having activities. I know in the area I live, and I think there's arcade bars all throughout the US. There's one company where they have an arcade bar where people get together, they play arcades, and then they sell cider, they sell beer and alcohol. And so I think that's an interesting model that can be looked at in the sense of, well, what are some options that people can use? I know personally, if I would go to the arcade bar, I wouldn't really drink as much. I consume cannabis before I'd go. And I can see that being a really big hit for a lot of folks. But I'm curious to hear some of the other panelists as well, what they would have to say, whether Brian Anderson or Ace.
So I have fantasized about consumption lounges. Once weed started becoming legal in California, I was like, okay, that's got to be next, because when I was young, I always heard about the coffee shops in Amsterdam, and I always dreamed about, like, what's that like? Just being able to go into a public place and light up. So I started thinking, wow, I wish we could do that here. And then I actually visited some consumption lounges. I was able to go to Palm Springs, and I visited one. It wasn't quite as I don't know, as sexy as I thought it was going to be, I guess you could say. Like it was quiet. There was no other people in there. It cost like $15 to go in, and there wasn't much to do. So I was kind of like, well, this is cool. And then in Vegas, it was another kind of situation where when I was 21, I go and get caught for smoking weed in a hotel, and they had police, they had the manager knocking at the door telling us we're going to get arrested. And it was like, they scared the hell out of us. And they said, two things: you can either leave, after we just checked in, and no refund, of course, or you can go to jail. We're like, all right, we're out of here. So that scared me so much. And then I just went to, Las Vegas just recently, and they got consumption lounges and they got cannabis everywhere. So it's just like, things have definitely changed. And, now just kind of getting other perspectives. It's like, it's not just a place to smoke, not just a place to meet, but there's other things that can be done in that space, and so I'm so happy to hear that Rich has those kind of experiences that he's planning for his place. I want to do the same.
Absolutely.
I'll add another state perspective is in New York. We're actively building out parts of the social equity program in New York, AKA the card program. It's full of flaws. Full disclaimer, the card program is full of flaws, but one interesting aspect is that they've made it for and I don't know if anyone on the here in the audience knows better than I, but whether the new license applicants who are not under the social equity will be given the same, but the social equity license holders, the card applicants in the state of New York, are granted as of right consumption lounge as part of their retail store. That's a really interesting aspect that could affect the way in which store operators choose to operate in the state of New York. So that's another approach, and the way another state is taking that approach. I don't know if that's the same going to be for all retail stores or just for the social equity stores. There's still some unclarity or, some fogginess around that.
Yeah, Brian, I think that's a really good point as well that you just made. Depending on the state legislation, on the local laws, how are people going to interact with one another? How are business owners interact with one another? Actually, I wanted to jump back as well to Ace when you brought up Amsterdam. I think it's, for a lot of folks, looking at Amsterdam as kind of that model, because Amsterdam for, years and years, we're talking, they've had their own consumption lounges. I was fortunate, being half German, I studied in Germany when I was writing my master's thesis on cannabis. I loved Amsterdam so much. I went back 4 times in a year. They couldn't keep me away. But when you're looking at how a business can get started, I think that would also be very valuable for a business, to look at how Amsterdam has done its model, compare that in the United States, how you could have it change. As an example with Amsterdam, they allow people to consume cannabis and they sell coffee and food. But one issue you see really in Amsterdam is, you have people that'll smoke cannabis, they'll be sitting around, they'll be having fun, but the lounge itself is not making enough money. And so what they do is then you have employees come up to you and say, hey, would you like a coffee? Or you have to buy something or leave. I think for a customer, that wouldn't really translate well into the customer experience. So just some general things to think about. And I think going into that is asking the question, what can we do as an establishment to make sure that customers have a great experience? And of course, this does translate into, having good financials. Anyone want to take that question on for the customer experience?
Well, I guess I'll jump in first again. So really what we're trying to do is create a dynamic environment that engages guests. Yeah, just like going back to what Ace just said, you go in, you smoke, and then what? You have to have events, you have to have activities to keep people engaged and wanting to be in your business and spend that money and spend for a snack or a drink or things like that, so that you won't have to go up there and ask them to purchase. But you also have to have a welcoming space that doesn't intimidate the curious consumer. They're going to be very overwhelmed with the way that a regulated cannabis industry is, and all the products and all the different ways of ingestion and things like that. So really, we're going to curate meaningful social connections in a safe and enjoyable space to relax, to unwind by yourself, with friends, or while meeting new ones.
Yeah. Rich, one thing, so as an architect working in many, many different verticals of architecture, and especially in urban environments, one aspect that is highly sought after in urban environments are community spaces, community rooms. Any kind of room that can be rented out to hold a meeting of 15 or more people is a highly sought after item in any urban environment. You've got everything from scout groups to AA meetings to just community board meetings, right? Just different nonprofit communities. Think about as entrepreneurs, think about the idea that you could build a community room that could be used guilt-free, right? That helps promote cannabis as a good neighbor. Maybe, from 3 to 4 in the afternoon, it literally is a local nonprofit group, or, raising money for something, and they just need a place to meet and talk. Perfectly acceptable, right? And I think, Rich, you described this as well. Your space functions that way. It has different events going on during the day and then radically different events at night. But that idea that you could create a room that's visible to the public, right, as opposed to that classic lounge idea. I'm from Massachusetts, right? We're full of Puritans. Bars never had windows that faced the street. Go figure, right? Husbands didn't want their wives to see them sitting in a bar, or the Puritan ethic didn't want anyone to see them sitting, consuming alcohol. I think flipping that on its head and suggesting that the consumption lounge could be this very visible thing from the street is a really interesting idea.
I think that's a great point. And I was just looking at some of the messages as well from some of our attendees, and Randy Shipley made a great point as well in Barcelona, the cannabis clubs there. So I think that would be also another wonderful place to do a little bit of research when it comes to our consumption lounges. So with that said, I think, we've had a good definition of what are consumption lounges, some ideas of where you can do some case studies. And I think it would be good if we now transition to discuss a little bit more about, operating a consumption lounge. I think there's so many different ways of operating a consumption lounge and important items to consider, but a couple of the big things that we thought we'd go over would be the legal and insurance requirements for the consumption lounges. So with that said, I'd be happy just to kind of start off and say that with consumption lounges throughout the United States, or, take consumption lounges out, cannabis, the United States, every state has its own rules and regulations. Now, there's a lot of similarities between the states, and that can be applied to consumption lounges. One example would be that you need a license to operate. Now, of course, that's going to depend when you have the license to operate, but then per state, you're going to have your own municipal requirements or your own state level requirements. Other examples as well when it comes to operating cannabis or consumption lounge to take into consideration would be 280E taxes. Federally, everybody is in trouble with 280E. 280E taxes the heck out of an establishment. So that's another thing to take into consideration. So with that said, I thought that'd be good just to discuss a general overview. But I want to turn it over to some of the panelists and discuss as well some of the legal aspects to think about.
I would like to start with that one. I did some research and in California, to Brian's point, like it's different from state to state. So the way it works here in California is the Department of Cannabis Control that regulates all cannabis activity they don't actually regulate consumption lounges, which is interesting because even though they don't regulate the consumption lounges, they still have rules that apply to consumption lounges. For example, it's up to the local jurisdiction to give you a license to operate a consumption lounge in your city. But the state says that you can't offer food and you can't have entertainment, which was just legislation that was introduced recently that was rejected. So it's interesting to, you know, how do you how do you entertain your guests if you have those rules, and why? Why does the Department of Cannabis Control, you know, how can they enforce those rules when they're not actually enforcing the license? So it's interesting here in California.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the, in a sense, legal ambiguity that can be brought up. And actually, I think another thing to think about, and Brian Anderson, I'd really love to have your thoughts on this, but discussing a risk management plan with operating a business.
So in my work as an architect with retail stores in cannabis, I spent a lot of time with my customers at the podium at a planning board meeting. And those are always interesting times, right? The public is invited, torches and pitchforks come out, and you hear all manner of things. I've always been impressed by my customers who come from the entertainment world, who come from bar and restaurant ownership. Very prepared group of people to talk to the public about how do you do crowd control, quite honestly. How do you check IDs, right? And one of the greatest props that you can bring to one of these meetings is I don't know if it's a black light, but there's a particular scanner that bars and restaurants use to check the ID, the validity of an identity, because there's always a elderly woman or man in the back saying, well, what are you going to do about fake IDs, right? Because we all used fake IDs when we were kids. And we used to get into bars that way. Well, it doesn't work anymore. And one of the most effective things is to pull out one of these modern scanners and just show it to the public and say, asked and answered. This is how we do this. And so I learn a lot from my customers who are in the entertainment industry. The other aspect is bartender training, right? How do you deal with a drunk person, right? They all go to risk management. They all go to a robust business plan that says, we understand the sort of parameters in which we're operating, and we train our staff to make that experience safe, to let the public be safe and law enforcement feel safe. So those are all just, I think, important aspects of the business plan that helps in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Having some sort of employee training program, I think that makes a lot of sense for operating a consumption lounge. Rich, what are your thoughts?
Obviously, having open to the public consumption presents many challenges. So mitigation is at the forefront of our policy. At least right now, we're still provisional. The beginning conversation is that we'll have to have an understandable and ironclad waiver. We'll also have to develop the policies and procedures to promote responsible adult cannabis use. Overconsumption will be addressed similar to a medical incident, and having an emergency contact on the waiver will provide information about onset and effects, such as concentrates versus flower, and drinks or edibles over combustion. So really also having readily available resources and discount codes for services like Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, hotels. That's obviously going to be a requirement in our business plan.
Yeah, actually on that topic of overconsumption, I think that is a very valid and important thing to think about. Ace, I believe we discussed that topic as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I hear that a lot. They're trying to create some device that's going to be able to measure how high you are, I guess. And they want to make sure that, people aren't driving away high and things like that. But, I see sometimes if you're new to cannabis, let's say, for example, you come in and you take a dab, well, that could wreck you for, the rest of your time at that place. But, you know, you got to realize that you're not going to just go and call 911 and rush to the hospital when you're feeling like that. So how do you train your staff to, make sure that they educate people before they do it? And, when can you cut someone off when you see that they're just, not gonna make it any further if they continue to smoke, so those are tricky. I mean, in the bar business, you see that all the time. That's the responsibility of the bartender to cut people off, and so yeah, I see a problem there, and I'm not exactly sure how to solve that issue, because everybody has different tolerance. I can go in and eat, 1,000 milligram edible and probably still operate, but then someone takes a 10 milligram edible and, they're tripping, so it's such a different scale of what you can take. So
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. Just the variation in people's tolerance to cannabis.
Right.
Fortunately, you can't smoke yourself to death. Unfortunately, people can drink themselves to death. And
Right.
I think that is, of course, one tremendous advantage when it comes to operating, a consumption lounge in the cannabis industry. And, maybe a maybe a fun business aspect can be if somebody smokes too much and they need to take a nap, you have, some couches or some beds to the side and you charge them for the amount of time it takes to sleep or something like that. That's
Idea. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of irony in this conversation too, because alcohol establishments don't deal with this. I mean, they cut you off and they kick you out. They take your keys, right? Or they send you to whatever. They send you home. Basically, they get you out of their establishment. What we're talking about here is over and above what the alcohol industry has ever dealt with or ever been forced to deal with. So it's interesting to hear, this idea of having Uber and Lyft on call, or knowing an Airbnb nearby where you could send somebody. That's way more than alcohol establishments have ever had to do.
I think that's a fair point. Absolutely. I think it's just that in the cannabis industry, we've had to repeatedly prove that we're responsible. We do have, culturally acceptance of alcohol where people have used it for, thousands of years, cannabis as well, by the way. But, it's accepted in American society to drink. And so, I think that's another good point that over time, we're going to see how people treat cannabis and, how it's going to work with operating a business. And that's something that will develop over time to where people, let's say, yeah, do we need to have an Airbnb, a place for them to stay? Can we just get them an Uber home? Why is it the alcohol industry has these standards and cannabis has these standards? And I think that's going to get sorted out over time. So with that said, we discussed a little bit more about some of the legal aspects and the general legal aspects, with federal law. Again, we mentioned having, for example, licenses to operate or 280E tax considerations, a minimum age requirement being likely. What would be some other state laws that we would need to think about, just as some particular examples of how that can vary from state to state? Brian Anderson, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Oh, and sorry, Brian.
I was on mute. Sorry, I don't. So the big piece is insurance, right? I think that's. I know we had a lot of input from our friends at the risk management committee here at the NCIA, so that's a big piece of of I think what's going to form the legal framework is the way in which we approach insurance.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And, frankly, this is something that I'm very fortunate, or we're fortunate to have, that, we represent the retail committee at the NCIA, but we also have an insurance group at the NCIA. And fortunately for us, we were also able to reach out to our fellow committee, the insurance committee, and ask them a little bit more about what their thoughts are. So with that said, let's talk a little bit more about insurance as well. Ace, I know that you might have some thoughts when it comes to the types of insurance that may be needed.
Yeah. So, and this is again, more than I thought of when I thought about just, a consumption lounge and, just getting people in there and, selling them my product and then come on over next door and blaze up. Well, you need liability insurance. It could be a minimum of a $1 million policy, but it does vary by state. You need employee practices liability insurance. So I think that's what we're talking about, training I guess the bud tender that's cutting people off, and having those best practices. You also have product liability, in case somebody gets sick off one of your products inside. You need commercial property insurance, marijuana specific liability. And you could just lose this business if you're not properly insured. So it's very important to talk to your underwriter to figure out exactly to get you covered completely, which is more than I thought of, like I said. So it's a eye-opening to learn these things. But yeah, a lot of insurance.
Yeah, that it informs much of what I do, right? So how my customers are insured informs a lot of the way in which space is designed. It's not an immediate, maybe obvious to people, right? Because it's so abstract, right? Something written down in a law book, but we discuss these things with our customers who are opening, whether it's retail establishments or, in the future, we're looking at consumption establishments, and understanding all of that and discussing that with your design team and your engineering team. Bring them into that conversation. Don't silo people. I know we all come, mostly from the illicit market into the regulated market, and bringing your design team into that as your core team is going to help get through these issues, right? Understanding what the local requirements are, if there are any, for HVAC. I saw in the comments somebody talking about, getting slammed with a $50,000 HVAC upgrade. That could well happen. And so your design team, who's going to try to fit those things in, is going to need to be part of that conversation. It's going to be started with regulations and insurance.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's eye-opening to see how insurance can affect how you operate your business. Rich, any thoughts on that as well?
Really, the initial conversations that we've had with our insurance provider, they're really just kind of stressing that to no outside product. Just because, yeah, someone may have overconsumed, but if it's an outside product and it's not tested, you're not exactly responding to a THC overconsumption. It could be something worse. So that's the first thing that I like to bring up, that my insurance provider is really concerned about, just people bringing in product. They don't know what's in it. They don't know where it's from, things like that. And really, many states are still struggling to define exactly what a designated consumption establishment is, what regulations will be enacted. So, similar to retail, municipalities can opt out. And, you could have this idea of opening a dispensary or a micro business cohabitated with a consumption establishment like myself. But if the municipality doesn't opt into that type of license type, then your dreams, unfortunately, are an uphill battle.
Yeah, I think I think echoing Ace's comment as well, that you need to work with your underwriter. And ultimately, yeah, the responsibility falls on the business establishments to understand what the insurance requirements are. So yeah, very important. Work with your underwriter. Talk to them. Be transparent, because you don't want to have a policy that doesn't cover you because you might have misspoke or didn't say something, and then it can cost you your business. And with that said, we want to transition to our next point. But before we do, I just really want to again thank the insurance committee at the NCIA. Eric Ron with S2S Insurance Specialists, Keith Dolan with KRD Risk Management Consulting, and Ed Hammer with the Specialty Insurance Partners. Really, thank you all so much. When we reached out, they provided us a long list, and we could spend hours talking about insurance. But with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the third part of our discussion, of the panelist discussion. And I think that, again, comes back to discussing the responsibility we hold to run a business and operate it, what the cultural and normative shifts are. And, really, I think this is a good opportunity to discuss the perception of cannabis and how that perception of cannabis is changing, even with consumption lounges. And I'd be curious, Brian Anderson, if you have any comments there.
Yeah, I don't know how many of y'all know the WELL movement, but WELL is a designation that can be applied to retail stores and facilities. It's been a while since I've seen it, but there were celebrity endorsements on TV promoting the WELL designation for businesses. And I would strongly encourage anyone wanting to open up a cannabis facility to begin to engage with and understand, what does WELL certification require as a designation for building, right? The LEED certification, maybe y'all have heard of LEED certification, so leadership in energy and environmental design. WELL is another really interesting aspect. And when you think about it, it affects both your employees and your customers. WELL designation. It talks about indoor air quality. It talks about many other aspects of providing a healthy work and retail or spatial environment. So with that, it becomes obvious that we should be promoting things like Rich, what you're doing in terms of having yoga classes, right? And I mentioned earlier this idea of community rooms as a public benefit. Provide things that can be really seen as a public benefit and go into spaces where cannabis has not been traditionally, right? Cannabis has traditionally been a basement thing, smoking amongst friends, because it's illegal. How do we really turn that on its head and draw attention to the fact that cannabis is a good neighbor? Cannabis can be a thing that brings people together in a positive way. So I would encourage people, when defining their business, to really think about how to turn, as you put it, these historic perceptions on their heads.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think when it comes to this cultural normative shifts, again, everyone knows cannabis is smoking cannabis. You'll be surprised how there's folks who don't know that you can eat and you can ingest cannabis, and maybe even fewer folks, for example, that don't know that you can drink cannabis. And me personally, I'm very interested in, having started my company, going into beverages. And I think that would be a very big social function in the future, where, whether it's at a consumption lounge where people are having beverages, and over time, as laws change and, you would be more acceptable to consume in public, how that could affect it as well. Rich, what are some of your thoughts?
So my thoughts that the designated consumption establishment, that is the key to normalization and elongating the market. We deserve the same rights and privileges as alcohol consumers. After all, this is a 21-year-old and over product that needs to come out of the shadows.
Right.
We're a legitimate business, generating tax revenue and creating employment opportunities. So I'm not sure why we're still here, why we have to go above and above, why half our country has legal access to adult use cannabis with Ohio passing, but yet we're still slotted, we're still stereotyped, we're still stigmatized. And I really hope that the lounge that I create in the space and the connections that are formed in my establishment will bring cannabis into light.
Absolutely, Rich. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also
sorry, Brian, that shift that Rich brought up in Michigan, I think is really critical as well, right? To reinforce that a designated consumption establishment does not slot it as a lounge, does not slot the operator in any preconceived way. So I really like that shift in language as a way to lead to a new direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I think you mentioned before that, language can affect legislation.
Yes.
And again, I think there is something there as well too, when operating a consumption establishment, for example, reaching out to your surrounding community, saying hi to the people you share a building with, for example, letting people know that, hey, these aren't the, the stoners that are, going to get up to no good, and, all the reefer madness propaganda that we've experienced. It's, this is a legitimate business. We're regular people like anybody else, and we just want people to get together and hang out, enjoy each other's company. With that said, I think it's good just to discuss a little bit more on the social dynamics. I think everybody here, and I believe particularly Richard and Ace, have had very strong experiences with cannabis, and, for example, with the law. And I'd really be curious just to lean in more again and talk to Ace and Richard and hear more about those experiences, and even how nowadays it's different from before. So really, guys, floor is yours.
Sure, I'll go. So I do come from the legacy space, and I am a social equity applicant, lucky enough to get a license here in Fresno. And to qualify for that, I had some problems in the past, but the thing is, the city. I remember the relationship I had with the city when I was operating was kind of tricky. I mean, they were coming up with all kinds of different laws. I mean, they were charging $1,000 per plant if you got caught growing weed here in Fresno, and we got caught. So we had a big fine over our head, and we had to get lawyers involved, and luckily we won that case, and it got dropped. But it's just funny to see how fast that changed to now it's being accepted, and they're just trying to help get these things open. I mean, they have been really I couldn't have done it without the city's help. Honestly, the social equity program here in Fresno, they helped us with grant funding. They helped us through the application process, and still, they're ready to help me in any way that I can. So, it seems it's just interesting, to go through what I went through, when I started in 2008 compared to, what I'm going through now. But, I guess that's the, I learned from all of it. I learned from all of it, and I'm just glad that we've made this cultural shift where it is getting more accepted. You start talking to people that you didn't know that smoke cannabis, and they do. You know what I'm saying? And once they hear I'm opening dispensary, they're so happy. They want to come to the store, and they can't wait till I open and stuff like that. So, to come full circle and be in the space that we're at now, it's just a blessing. How was your experience, Rich?
Polarizing as ever. I come from the legacy market and had my run-in with the law. I made a wrong turn in the right direction, like to say nowadays, even though back then I did not see it that way. But cannabis is moving more to the mainstream, but yet we're still stigmatized. So to me, it's kind of, this double standard that we have to put up with, where people can advertise alcohol and publicly drink, have all these things for a substance that is not safer for the individual or society as a whole. So just really trying to infuse hospitality and cannabis to shadow those stereotypes, because cannabis has been at attendance in all the usual events, concerts, parties, clubs, so on and so forth. I mean, this is our opportunity to really do it right, really put it in the forefront to say we generate more revenue, things like that. And it's time for a shift.
Big time. Yeah, and I think there's a saying that the first soldier up the hill gets shot. And I have to say I'm fortunate in my experiences before I went into the legal industry, that I haven't been caught with cannabis. But I will say that there's people like Richard, there's people like Ace that have had to go through the system, working with the legal aspects. And even though those individual experiences are very powerful, when you culminate those with the millions of people that have gone through it, and people are putting two and two together and saying, do we really need to spend so much time on this? I think it's very impactful. But I think that's a great point, though. We're experiencing changes in laws. We're experiencing changes in how people perceive cannabis. I can tell you, coming from Texas, growing up with it, that was a huge no-no. 15, 20 years ago, if you had cannabis, you're just a stoner. And honestly, when I was a kid, I believed it, and then, I had to try cannabis and saw the light, literally. But I think that, again, that's something to talk about, and I really like to get other panelists' ideas and thoughts then when it comes to what they've seen with cultural shifts, how the laws have changed, how people have interacted with them, how maybe it's changed 10 years ago to now.
I'll echo something Ace said, is how people can surprise you, right? People in the community whom you never imagined had a connection to the plant, suddenly you realize they do. And I've presented on planning board reviews where the most curmudgeonly dude on the board stands up and says, you know, my daughter had cancer and we live here in, you know, New Hampshire, and we couldn't get the product, so we brought her down to Florida where we could get her. And you just never imagined that this gentleman was going to stand up and say that. You thought he was going to stand up and just rail against the product, right? People have compassion, people have emotion that is really sometimes hard to see because it's been so far stigmatized and prohibited. So I think the same is true for folks like myself, professionals who can advocate on behalf of cannabis businesses and understand that we are out there, right? Maybe I don't have the same experience of getting busted, but I do have a passion for the plant and a passion to promote it. And we can advocate for the community by bringing in standards and understandings of standards. And this sort of conversation we're having today, I think, is, you know, what are the insurance applications, what are the design applications that can really help promote an improved public perception.
Big time. Big time. Rich, Ace, your thoughts as well?
Yeah, well, I'll go, Rich. You know, I really feel like, you know, this is an opportunity for us. You know, I've always thought that way, just being in the beginning of this process of legalization here in California. I've always supported, you know, when I was running my legacy dispensary, that we were helping people, you know, that people didn't know where to get it. They just started hearing that it's helping with all kinds of things. And, you know, so we were really a wellness provider, and that was passion for me, you know, hearing the stories of people, their lives being changed just by using cannabis. I mean, cancer patients, it was great. So it was just like, I got to do this forever, you know? And so I think right now we have that opportunity to show the public, you know, the people that make these laws, that, you know, we're not the bad guys. Weed's not this horrible thing that's going to ruin people's lives. You know, it's actually going to enhance people's lives, and it helps a lot of people. And you know, we all speak the same language. If you don't know someone and you find out, you know, they're smoking some weed over there, like, oh, okay, well, it's an icebreaker. You're going to go and be able to have some kind of common interest just right off top, just by smoking weed. So, you know, I think we can just show the public that, you know, we can operate these kind of businesses responsibly, and we're writing the rules at this point, you know, like, so I'm taking all this in so that I can build my business plan and present it to my local legislation, and just to let them know, this is my idea, this is how it could look, and these are all the safeguards that we have in place. And I think at this point, the door's open for those kind of the changes. So I'm excited. I'm excited what the future holds for our industry.
You're here.
Absolutely. Well, and again, I think that just ties back to our conversation that society has been viewing cannabis different over the last decade, 2 decades, you know, from the medical to the adult use. And I think it's really important to see that we're now at that stage with consumption lounges or consumption areas, that we're seeing the continued progression in society accept cannabis and say, hey, this is just a plant. You know, with that said, I'd like to go ahead and move on and transition to our Q&A, answer some questions from our audience. So I'll go ahead and just bring up the Q&A now, and let's have a look. So there's a question from Steve Spriggs. Let's have a look here. So he says that many local governments still struggle with the concept of the evil weed in their communities. The result is usually gross overregulation of the cannabis business to minimize exposure to their residents. How would you approach the local politicians to allow consumption enterprises? I think that's a great question. Any panelists? Rich, would you like to take that?
Yeah, really, I would start with the community of where your facility will be. We had a plan, it kind of fell through, but I wasn't enacting with the community leaders then. The politicians will maybe shut you right down as soon as they hear cannabis. But if you approach the people that are, you know, representatives of that neighborhood specifically, they'll be more inclined to hear your proposal and hear you as a business owner instead of having to worry about votes right off the top. He can have his constituents in that area come to him and say, please talk with this person and hear his idea and hear how we can help him implement it. So I would say just slow down, kind of, going to any block clubs, chamber of commerce meetings, etc., things like that. People that are leaders in the community are your key to getting into your politicians, in my opinion.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%, Rich. So I'll bring examples of my 20 years as an architect, even prior to coming into cannabis. Every developer of a new project goes through exactly that process. And I think that's a message I want the cannabis community to understand. We are not unique. Every developer goes through exactly what Rich described, whether it's a 150 unit housing development, the heat and pressure that that developer is under because the neighbors don't want the traffic in their neighborhood is intense. And so every developer, whether you're developing a cannabis consumption or 150 or 200 unit housing development, where we all need housing. Housing is clearly an issue in the United States, no matter where you live. And it's hard for developers to get housing projects built. So if you understand that fundamentally, there's a way to go about that. And it's exactly what Rich said. Meet your local community, understand the concerns of your local community, present yourself as a tax-paying citizen that, and tell your story, tell your exact story, don't sugarcoat it, and bring that forward to your local community. And that's the way that every other developer operates in any industry. It's through conversations first, get to know your folks, your local community. Yep.
Wonderful. Ace, any thoughts as well?
No, that's what I was planning, get in with my local community once I start running my dispensary and really start building that relationship and showing them that, this is successful. We're not causing any problems, and then kind of ease my way into this is our next expansion that we want to go through, and I'm hoping to get their buy-in. I'm hoping to get their buy-in because then I'm going to go to the local jurisdiction, the legislators, and let them know, hey, I got my neighborhood's buy-in, and these are the rules that we already have a plan to operate this business safely and go from there.
Absolutely. Great. Well, then we're going to take on another question from another one of our audience members. That would be Christian Perrine. Christian writes, hi, and that's H-I-G-H. Very well played, Christian. Hi and hello. Thank you for your time. I acquired a license from adult use consumption establishment. Do you have any information for social equity applicants looking for funding solutions?
I guess I'll jump off really quick since I know Kristen from my personal experience. How you doing? It's good to see you on the call. Unfortunately, the state of Michigan just released their grant program, but it is for operating licenses only. Detroit did just issue some last week, which I did receive a small grant for pre-qualification reimbursement, basically. Other than those two right there, just working with groups like the NCIA and other groups like that are what's going to get you in front of the people that has the funds right now. Because I was even wondering where the ease and the gauge social equity funds and grants went. I didn't see them this year at all. So it seems like social equity is definitely even taking a backseat to big money, but I mean, it's nothing new, unfortunately. And, you just got to bootstrap it now and keep on your mantra of why people like myself, Ace, and you deserve a real chance in this industry.
Yeah, I would definitely say raising funds in this industry is a challenge for everyone. It's especially for social equity. We have kind of this I don't know, bad vibe, I guess, when it comes to investors like, oh, well, social equities aren't too successful most of the time. So it's it's a gamble. But I think you have to be ready with your pitch. You have to have your business plan. You have to have your performa worked out. You got to be ready to answer those questions. And like Rich said, you got to join some organizations so that you can build your network to get in front of those people. Joining groups like NCIA, is a perfect way to expand your network and get those opportunities to talk to people. And yeah, you're gonna get a lot of no's, but people invest in you. That's the thing. You might have the best plan and the numbers look great, but they're going to invest in you. So just remember that. That's all I could say.
I think that was very well said.
Yeah, I can say from my perspective, working with a broad range of applicants across many, many different economic spheres, is that money is tight, right? Interest rates have spiked. If you're pre-revenue, right? If you don't have a business that's already open and operating, it gets really, really hard to raise capital for anybody, right? So I echo what Ace said. Building a network is super important. Believing yourself and just keep going. One thing about the cannabis industry is, no is not an option. We've all been told no, right? We've all been told no, and yet we persist. So I like that spirit. Keep up the spirit, I guess.
Wonderful. Well, I know we're getting towards the top of the hour, but we thought we'd just field one more question from Jeremy Ortiz. So Jeremy had a few questions, but I think we'll try and just pick the question we can answer with the least amount of time, since we are running out of time. So with that said, a question Jeremy has is, Rich, do you envision your lounge being tied to a dispensary? And I think a lot of this is covered with regards to, how do you get insurance for that? How does that apply to it? And is it easy to obtain coverage for a smoke lounge? So Rich, what are some of your thoughts there?
So far, like I said, it's still really early in insuring things. There was only 2 licensed and operational in Michigan, and one of them has since shut down. So right now there's only one, and it's only an event space. So trying to find the right coverage for insurance is a little scary, especially having provisional licenses there. Your property technically isn't secured. So I've gotten very wild numbers on an estimate on what it would do to do an umbrella policy to answer this question, to cohabitate both of my license type, a Class A micro business and a designated consumption establishment. So far, that is the one answer I've heard. Let's do an umbrella policy to where it covers you completely up to this X, Y, and Z amounts. It seems like that is going to be it, rather than meal piecing it. Who I don't want a chink in the armor with being the first one up the hill, as you put it. So
sure. We don't want anybody to get shot down. That's true. All right. Well, with that said, I'd like to go ahead and transition this to some closing remarks from our panelists before we turn it back over to Brian Gilbert. So with that said, is there a panelist that would like to provide their closing remark? And if not, we'll start with Ace Castillo.
Sure. As I kind of just mentioned before, I think this is just a great opportunity for us to figure it out together. Especially when we have access to people that are doing this in multiple states, to start borrowing best practices from Rich, hearing what Brian has got going on with his customers out in New York, and just putting together almost like this, this perfect business model, and just change the perception. I think that's just our responsibility. We're changing the perception of what cannabis looks like in this new age that we're living in, and it's a positive. I think we're going in a positive direction where it's only going to go up from here. So,
absolutely wonderful. Brian Anderson, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give an unabashed plug for NCIA. I've been in committees since 2019, both the facilities design and now the retail committee, and it's been an enormous benefit for that connectivity, right? I know that one phone call away, I can connect with people for what I need within the cannabis space. So that's been a tremendous piece. I would encourage folks to be on a committee, join a lot of really, really great folks to help exactly what Ace is saying. Build your network, understand how like minds are operating within the cannabis space, and do reach out to professionals. I mean, again, professionals are going to be needed to help bridge some of these gaps, and I really appreciate that don't take no in the cannabis space, right? We've all been told no, you can't smoke in study hall, no, you can't grow plants in mom's basement, and no, you can't have $40 million for your dream facility, right? Everybody gets told no. Persist, persist, persist.
Wonderful. Richard?
So it's still really early. I say it again. Follow my progress. This is the exact example of what cannabis is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a guy that had felony convictions, that got him expunged, that is moving into the regulated market to do something. I was stuck in the service industry as the best job I could find as a convicted felon that had that would not pass urine analysis. So service industry was my background by force. And when I went to go for my expungement, I said, never again. I'll never work in the service industry again, restaurants specifically. But now that it'll be my cannabis cafe, I can't wait to get back in the service industry. So it was something for me that I didn't understand at the time, but it was meant to be. It directed me this whole time to be able to talk to you with this passion and this determination to be one of the first up the hill and blaze this trail, because someone has to. So I just really thank everybody. My relationship with someone like Ace, we've been a part of this NCIA for years now. It's like I almost know the guy. I see him 4 times a month. He's in Cali, I'm in Detroit, he's in Fresno. So just things like that, just keep on keeping on. It can happen. It can happen. Just with the right resources, and if you give the right people the right resources, they're gonna lead the way, like myself. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rich. And yeah, just to give my last thoughts on this is we're seeing the change. It might be glacial, but we're seeing the change. And in order to be a part of that change and help expedite that change, it falls on our shoulders collectively to be responsible, to say, hey, if I'm going to consume cannabis, I'm going to consume it responsibly. I'll go to a consumption lounge and I'll, enjoy cannabis there, but I'll also behave myself. Can you imagine if we had people, dying in car wrecks from cannabis? Little examples like that people would use against us. So I just want to turn back and say to everyone, this is our responsibility to operate our businesses the right way, to conduct ourselves the right way, and to help continue change perception of what cannabis is and what a cannabis consumer is. So with that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Brian Gilbert. Again, I just want to say thank you so much to the other panelists. It's been really a pleasure, and thank you very much to the audience that has joined us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Brian Hart, one of the many Brians joining us on today's panel, for presenting and moderating this fantastic conversation. As always, we want to close out the session while we still got a few of you in the room. You should have seen an outro poll that popped up. We'd love some immediate feedback. That always helps us improve future programs and get the actual feedback to our panelists to know we made the most of your time today. In case you missed the announcement earlier this week, do mark your calendars. And if you are an NCIA member, log into Community Hub today to register for our upcoming Stakeholder Summit series that will be taking place in 4 different markets across the first quarter of 2024. As with last year, our networking and educational events will be culminating with the 12th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days at the end of May in Washington, D.C. There are exclusive perks that we offer, as including complimentary access for all NCIA members based on your membership level for all of these events. So head to NCIA's website following today's conversation to learn more and register your team. And then again, a huge thank you to all of our sponsors that have already signed on to support this new educational event series: A Therapeutic Alternative, Summit Virtual CFO by Anders, Dope CFO, Vicente LLP, 420property.com, and last but not least, Hunter Esquire and Arvin Plant Labs. We are offering discounted pricing on all sponsorship opportunities through the end of the year. So if you are wanting to get your brand in front of established business owners in 2024, make sure to reach out over the next week and a half before prices increase on January 1st. And then again, a huge shout out and thank you to the 35 member businesses that have already signed on to support next year's edition of our annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days. You can learn more about all these pioneering businesses and register to attend Lobby Days on NCIA's website following the broadcast as well. And then at the top of the hour, I saw a number of you all indicate that you were not current members of NCIA at the moment. If you are one of the few current NCIA members that are still here left in the room, make sure to mark your calendars for our monthly membership orientation meeting. Every third week of the month, our NCIA membership team comes together to teach you all how to maximize your benefits. And if you are not a current NCIA member, registering to attend and joining is a great opportunity to learn how you can get some amazing ROI by joining NCIA and supporting our continued efforts for advocacy on the federal level. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible journey we've had exploring the insider's guide to operating a consumption establishment in today's Industry Essentials webinar, Puff, Pass, Prosper. I hope you all found our deep dive into this intriguing subsector as insightful and enriching as I have. Massive thank you to all of our panelists and all of the members of NCIA's Retail Committee and Risk Management Committee that contributed to today's conversation, unraveling the complexities, potentials, and future trends surrounding consumption establishments. Before we part, a reminder, as always, that our commitment at NCIA to your education does not end here. Our Industry Essentials educational webinar series is concluding for 2023. But we will be back in the new year, and we will remain your go-to source for timely, engaging, and essential education delivered directly to you. Thank you once again for joining us today. Your engagement and enthusiasm makes these webinars truly special. Until our next exploration, stay informed, stay engaged, and continue prospering in the ever-evolving world of cannabis. This is Brian Gilbert signing off. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to welcoming you back soon in the new year. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.